right. Well, welcome to the Grolier Club, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jamie Cumby. I'm the L&A Michelson librarian here at the Grolier Club, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker. In addition to being a truly delightful person, Kristy Caldwell is an illustrator based here in New York. She's illustrated more than a dozen children's books, including Flowers for Sarajevo, a 2017 New York Public Library Best Book for Kids, and helped launch experimental literary journal Carrier Pigeon, Illustrated Fiction and Fine Art. She's taught at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, at Pratt Institute, and at the School of Visual Arts, and she's currently an assistant professor of illustration at Queens College, CUNY. Her work has been recognized by American Illustration and Communication Arts, but most importantly for me and for the members in the room, Kristy is also the first ever visual artist to be awarded our library's William H. Helfand Fellowship. That's over the course of 20 years. When I first read her application, I was instantly delighted by its premise. A series of bookplates where a bookshop cat wanders through the Grolier Club's collection. The project she's going to be presenting tonight, Catenary Books, is the result of her 2 weeks spent up in the reading room with me and my colleagues this past summer. She pored over the club's extensive collection of bookplates, studying their visual motifs and design characteristics, as well as the ways in which collectors have historically fashioned their identities through their bookplates. I won't talk more because I just want to see these bookplates. I've been dying to see them. I understand she finished them literally this week. So we're seeing hot off the presses the fabulous results of her research here at the club. Please join me in welcoming Kristy.
Thank you so much. So I also want to start by thanking just everybody at the Grolier Club who welcomed me and supported me. I had no idea I was the first visual artist to receive this fellowship when I applied for it. Just sort of dove in. But I especially want to thank Jamie Cumby, the Bruce and Mary Crawford curator, Scott Elwood, library assistant Kevin McKinney, and the executive director, Declan Keeley, who were also wonderful. So I don't know if I can explain this project as well as Jamie already has, actually. But Catenary Books is basically a series of 6 narratively connected bookplates. I developed them during my fellowship here at the Grolier Club Library. And so when I started, what I hoped to gain from the fellowship was a deeper understanding of bookplate traditions and how bookplates carry meaning. And I did get that. But I also gained, I think, a new community through the fellowship, met a lot of the members who were coming in and out, was introduced to, everybody who floats in and out of the building. And it's just a really wonderful community. I'm so glad that I had a chance to spend so much time here. So just this entire process has been a real joy since day one. And I'm genuinely excited to share this project, which I've been working on basically since June, and also how it's been influenced from what I learned from the Grolier Club's collections. So before applying to the fellowship, I visited this exhibition here at the club. Very happenstance, it was raining. I needed to get out of the rain. And it ended up being kind of a transformative visit because it directly led to my application for the fellowship. This exhibit, Imaginary Books, Lost, Unfinished, and Fictive Works Found Only in Other Books, presented physical representations of books, games, and ephemera that only exist inside other texts, which is amazing for me because I'm very interested in world building and making physical, objects to represent that. So I pulled a couple of examples from my own photos and typed out some excerpts from the labels so you can kind of understand the playfulness of the exhibit. So the photo on the left is, I don't want to speak for the artist, but it's a physical representation of a book that exists within Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. So the excerpt says, "The Matter of the Dragons contained all that was known of the early days of dragonkind outside of their own records, which they do not share." So one thing I really loved about this exhibit was the kind of in-world text on the art labels that brought you fully into the world instead of speaking from the remove of a curator. And the example on the right is called The Wild Book. It also had an in-world art label, and an excerpt says, "The Wild Book is a book willing to be read by only one reader and resisting all attempts on the part of anyone else." So this gave, obviously, if you're interested in illustration, storytelling, narrative art, being exposed to an exhibit like this gives you a lot of ideas instantly. One thing I took from it was the idea of using paratext, the material outside of the main text that influences how you see it, like the cover, the footnotes, the table of contents, as a tool for world building. And when I got home, I browsed the digital collections of the Maria Gerard Messenger Women's Bookplate collection, which they helpfully have accessible online. And it collects more than 2,000 examples of women's bookplates. And so, the wheels just kind of started turning on the idea of using a bookplate as a narrative object and building a series from that. So the first thing I just want to quickly address for people who aren't as interested in book ephemera as I am is like, what is a bookplate? So they're labels attached to the inside of books. They're also called ex libris, which is Latin for from the books of. They function as ownership labels. So when you see ex libris on a bookplate, it's marking that book as part of a specific library. And the example on the left is an example from the Messenger collection. The example in the middle is something I saw on my first day. I think I was too excited and I didn't write down which specific collection it was from. And then the one on the right is an example of, pasting a bookplate into a copy of a book, just so you can see it where it lives. They're very small, designed to fit into a book unobtrusively. So the one on the left, maybe you'll be able to see, is less than 2 inches tall. A lot of the historical examples at the Grolier Club are engravings, especially these by Edwin Davis French. And so they're incised with tiny lines on metal plates, and there's an enormous amount of detail in that 2 inches. The one in the middle, because I'm greedy, is the one that I took as an example for the size I wanted to work with. It's the largest one I saw while I was here. And I wanted to see how large, as an illustrator, I wanted to see just how large I could get away with. So it's about 3.5 inches by 4.5 inches from edge to edge, and then the design inside is a little bit smaller. And then on the right is just an example of how, while I was here at the fellowship, I used a loop to see the details of the book plates because they are so small. So historically, these are commissioned objects, commissioned by an institution, by a private collector. They would commission the designer to create it for them. So you have a dialogue between the designer and the collector. And they can be, I think as Jamie referenced, they can be deeply personal objects. They're encoding taste, education, aspiration in a very compact form, how people want to be seen as, people of letters, literate people with a personal library. So some of them feel kind of like tiny portraits of a reader's inner world, also, just a window into how somebody sees themselves in context of their relationship to books. Some also, rather than being portrait style, emphasize symbolic scenes and objects. So I chose, for this example, a book plate that was commissioned for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a book plate in the middle that I just thought it looked cool. But I was just very taken with it. Commissioned for a woman named Martha August. She's reading, she's outdoors, she has a beauty mark on her cheek. And then on the right, one that came out of the William H. Helfand Bookplate collection, which collects medical ephemera, and so this was from a doctor, and I like the kind of horror movie lighting. So, these days you're more likely to encounter universal book plates, which include a blank space for the owner's name to be written in. They're cheaper and, these days often mass produced. So one of my goals was actually to create a universal book plate that felt special for the owner by producing a limited edition that preserves the book plate traditions of printmaking and material care that goes into the process. And these are just two examples of juvenile book plates for children that where you can see that their names were written in at the bottom. So this, let me see here. So this is a view of the enclosure that houses the book plates I designed after the fellowship. So taking that material care into consideration, I wanted to protect the book plates. They're a set of 6. So they're basically a nonlinear series that tells a story that can be arranged in any order. And I decided to house them in a handmade enclosure that kind of walks you into the world as you open it. So if you were to receive it, you would see the enclosure closed with the belly band around it. When the belly band is removed, a simplified stamped version of the logo is revealed. So that logo kind of doubles as the logo of the imaginary bookshop that's sort of at the center of this project, and the title of the project itself. So when you open the tab and pull up the first flap, the interior side offers an in-world project description of the project. And I pulled that text on the side. So it says, the bookshop cat walks along the catenary. These book plates document the wanderings of a cat who sleeps all day and would prefer to sleep all night as well, if only he could find an appropriately sunny spot. His nightly movements take him from book to book, where his interference with the collection has been recorded. When you open the next flap, you'll see a provisional index of the books the cat has interfered with so far, listed alphabetically by author. And so I have the index on the side here too. A book by Jesse Ball, a short story by Borges, a novel by Italo Calvino, a short story by Stephen Millhauser, a story by Vladimir Nabokov, and a very interesting book that I'll talk about later that collects letters sent to Mount Wilson Observatory between 1915 and 1935. So the book plates themselves come stacked in the order of the index. I really wanted to not indicate the chronology of the cat's journey. We can't know that. We're not the cat. We don't know which books he visited first. So I hope by following, that chain of logic, people will feel encouraged to mix them around. But these are the 6 book plates side by side here. You can see all 6. So right now they're in the order of, I believe, on the side, they're in the order of The Library of Babel, The Baron and the Trees, No One Will Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again, Cat and Mouse, Sleep Death's Brother, and Cloud Castle Lake. So I'll just talk a little more about some things that really inspired me and influenced the project before I kind of get into the details of the making of the project. Something that really struck me while I was here about the Grolier bookplate collection was the range. There are these, as you can see on the left, these formal heraldic designs that borrow from coat of arms, very traditional, but also small handmade plates and juvenile book plates, that introduced children to the idea of being a caretaker of books. The book plate on the right was a hectograph made using hectography, which was a duplication process that used special inks and gelatin. So it's kind of like an ancestor of today's process with gel printing plates. And then the one in the middle was created by the artist that I believe it's depicting, on the plate. And then one of my favorite discoveries was book plates that include multiple owners. I didn't even try to look up any context for the book plate on the left inscribed "the property of Alice Klauber and her friends." I prefer to kind of imagine how that worked, that they had a shared library together. And then another is a book plate designed by Edie French that was commissioned for Maria Gerard Messenger and shared with her companion, Elizabeth Chamberlain. And so you can see it has both of their names at the top. At the bottom, it says the Orchards, and then it shows their home, and it's a very uplifting, joyful, kind of domestic scene. I was also very influenced by Japanese book plates. I spent time with the March 1986, I think, issue of the Bookplate Journal, as well as book plates in Japan, the portfolio on the right, which was a very recent acquisition by the Grolier Club Library at the time, and contains 50 examples of Japanese book plates, original examples adhered to the portfolio. And I think Jamie was the person who told me that this portfolio existed. So I want to thank you for that. I came in kind of not having no idea, what the collections actually were and what the holdings really are. And one thing that was really fantastic was that everybody were kind of checking in to see where I was headed with this and bringing in things that I could consult. So these are 3 examples from inside book plates in Japan. And according to the article, Bookplate Collecting in Japan, which was in that issue, that March 1986 issue of the Bookplate Journal, book plates arrived in Japan through Western examples around 1900. You can instantly see that they're more colorful and that, they're using different processes to create them. These were, I believe, woodcut and copperplate print book plates. So one thing that's very cool, I think, about this is that I read in the article that early Japanese bookplate societies were formed because of the enthusiasm about the introduction of book plates, and they actively exchanged them, collected them in albums, and artists donated book plates to help support those networks. So there's something really interesting about these small private labels being exchanged in a community and having kind of a public life and a social life. Because I was here doing this research fellowship, I had the opportunity to see all of this in person. And I was able to, gaze upon these wonderful brushstrokes on this book plate, see the texture, look at them through the loop. So this is an example, I think, that really shows just like the confidence of the process that they were using as well, with the hand painting on top of the woodcut as a way of finishing the book plate. And then coincidentally, inside that issue of the Bookplate Journal was this article, Katazome Bookplates, by W.E. Butler, which broke down a stencil and dye process that uses rice paste as a resist. And it included photos of the whole process and actually had a tipped-in original bookplate created from that process. So I was able to look at that and handle that. And then these are also finished with hand painting after printing. When I was printing my own book plates, which were screen printed, I printed a few additional copies on slightly thicker bright white paper. The original edition is on kind of a parchment toned paper, very, very thin, a little bit translucent, because I wanted to try the hand painting on top of the book plate. So my intention is to try hand coloring on a few of these and maybe produce a very small variable edition of just a couple. So far, I've only done some crazy color tests that you can kind of see in the background, but it's on my list now. So this is just a close-up of the cat in the Bookplate set. This is from the Bookplate that was referencing The Library of Babel by Borges. I don't consider this the first Bookplate in terms of the cat's journey, but it is the first one I drew, and it did help inform the concept of the project. I have basically been an insomniac my entire life, since I was like 5 years old. And when I was a kid, I would stuff a towel under my door and make a tent with my pillows and read with a flashlight just all night. And so I kind of feel like this project and the cat in particular comes out of that experience, just kind of roaming around in and out of these books all night, every night while everyone else sleeps. But he's not a stand-in for me. I would have been interested in what was going on in these scenes. He's really not. He's really just looking for a spot to take a nap, and he's getting a little frustrated. But as he drifts through, he functions as a connector. His movement in and out of each bookplate links the scenes to one another. And so because each scene is a distinct narrative fragment with no prescribed order, he gives us that encouragement to speculate about what we're seeing, what came before, and what might come next. So this is just another shot of the 6 book plates lined up. More and more, I'm really drawn to work that engages someone's imagination rather than focusing on offering a full, literal, description of a scene. And so one thing that was really fun for me with this is that the scenes are all unresolved, and they will forever be unresolved. These are meant to be pasted into books and dispersed into shelves. And once you do that, any attempt to curate a sequence just disappears. You can't control it. From then on, the way someone encounters the cat's journey depends on where the book plates have ended up. So the narrative needed to be nonlinear by design. So my hope is that, each plate can stand alone and that the arrangement is open. That was the intention. And so each is, like I mentioned, is inspired by a scene from a book these are all actually from my personal library. I initially considered using scenes from recognizable classic novels, but I could not get myself excited about the idea of drawing Moby Dick. I don't know if I would have finished. So I just decided to use texts that I have read over and over and over, shared with other people, loaned out, that I buy multiple copies of so I can loan them out to people. And one thing also that attracted me to these is that they're not already associated with specific illustrations. So these are just responses. These kind of carry responses to moments that stayed with me in those books. But of course, the cat is interfering with them, so they're not perfect moments. But they're definitely not official illustrations for these books. So this plate is referencing a moment in The Baron in the Trees by Italo Calvino. In the novel, there's a young nobleman named Cosimo, and he decides to live permanently in the trees. So in one scene, he is leading a group of what the book calls local urchins to safety after they're caught stealing fruit from the farmers' orchards. And so the scene that I kind of plucked out that I wanted to work with, there's a little line from it. The men with pitchforks who thought they had caught the fruit thieves at last saw them hopping away through the air like birds. So you can see the cat also leaping away from the pitchforks in the bottom right, which is too bad because an orchard in Italy sounds like a great place to take a nap. So that would have been a good one. This plate responds to Borges' The Library of Babel. So if you haven't read that story, it imagines an infinite library as a stand-in for the universe. I worked from the description of the architecture. One line reads, "In the hallway, there is a mirror which faithfully duplicates all appearances. Men usually infer from this mirror that the library is not infinite. I prefer to dream that its polished surfaces represent and promise the infinite. Light is provided by some spherical fruit which bears the name of lamps. There are 2, transversely placed in each hexagon. The light they emit is insufficient, incessant." So I'm not sure why the cat is leaving the library. It's it's not sunny. That's probably why. But also to me, he seems a little creeped out by the infinite regress or the glowing orbs. And then this plate, again, is referencing No One May Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again, Letters to Mount Wilson Observatory, 1915 to 1935, which was published by the Museum of Jurassic Technology in Los Angeles. If you haven't been to that museum, I really, really recommend it. So it collects real letters sent to the observatory by people offering, again, their personal cosmological theories. They're often poetic, almost impossible to visualize definitively. And so here's a short excerpt that kind of stayed with me from the beginning. Maybe even the first letter. I think the letter writer's name is Alice. Venus is thickly blanketed with clouds. That is a place that stores the clouds. Jupiter be, I suppose, a store place for rain, snow, and hail. Others to keep air, wind, sunfire, wildfire, starfire, moisture, electricity, gases. It is worked by a human spirit world of human spirits that run over the top of the world in wind. And so the idea here, I'm gathering, is that the cat isn't super excited about all the letters, all of these intense letters floating down and starting to kind of head his way. This plate references Cloud Castle Lake by Vladimir Nabokov, which I used to think was a really funny story, and I reread it recently, and it's very sad. So in it, there's a man on a truly miserable group trip, and in the middle of his misery, he encounters an impossibly perfect view through a window. So here's a description. Upstairs was a room for travelers. I shall take it for the rest of my life, he's reported to have said as soon as he had entered it. The room itself had nothing remarkable about it. On the contrary, it was a most ordinary room. But from the window, one could clearly see the lake with its cloud and its castle in a motionless and perfect correlation of happiness. So basically, I don't want to tell you the end, but let's just say you're going to be so frustrated. So you can't see the perfect view properly here because unfortunately the cat is blocking our view. Nabokov was a lepidopterist, and it looks like some butterflies have appeared to carry the cat away. So if you can read the story and you'll get more details about the scene. So this book plate is inspired by the short story Cat and Mouse by Stephen Millhauser from the book Dangerous Laughter, which imagines a cat confronting the existential consequences of actually catching the mouse. As a lifetime Looney Tunes fan, I instantly understood this dilemma. So the story is definitely indebted to Looney Tunes. Lots of props, lots of cartoon physics. It's basically a sleepy bookshop cat's nightmare. And a line from it is, "Now there is nothing left but the red handkerchief. The halves become red theater curtains which begin to close. Across the closing curtains, words write themselves in black script. The end." We haven't gotten that far, so I hope he makes it. This plate is referencing the book Sleep Death's Brother by Jesse Ball, which is a manual on lucid dreaming. One piece of advice in the book, I think on page 55, says, "Next time you wake up in a dream and realize your true situation, please try it. Just jump into the air and fly away. You will see that it works very well." So the cat has woken up in this scene and is just instantly kind of hightailing it out of there. And I think, unless you like giant eyeballs with tendrils, I think we all know why. So the visual designs of the book plates were informed by elements in specific examples of book plates in the Grolier Club's collection. I didn't treat them as models to imitate, but more as constraints and compositional prompts. So for the cat's interference with Baron in the trees, I was actually drawn to that particular scene partially because of this book plate when I saw it. I really loved how it used, density and a full bleed design to create kind of a sense of enclosure. So that's something I wanted to to borrow for my bookplate. And it's also the only one that is full bleed. For the Library of Babel inspired bookplate, the design inspiration isn't as directly visible, and that's because of how the process went. My original intention was to design each bookplate in a totally different style, and that kind of referenced the bookplate I was taking design inspiration from. And so I started this one with a much more geometric approach, but halfway through I decided I really wanted the full set to feel harmonized and have a handmade feel, so I pivoted. But this one did really help me approach repetition in pure black and white at a small scale. And I did take, the symmetry and the depth and some of the elements of the shelving. For the bookplate inspired by No One Will Ever Have the Same Knowledge Again, I took design inspiration from this bookplate designed by Edie French. It's hard to avoid having a lecture that is just filled with only Edie French bookplates once you start to look at them. This one kind of shocked me because it feels very psychedelic to me, and it's from 1906. It was engraved, meaning it was printed from a metal plate and sized with extremely, extremely fine lines. And so I didn't try to mimic that, not with screen printing and not as someone just learning screen printing, especially. But I did take direct inspiration from the curved outer edge, the dynamic way that was handled, and then the swirl of books around the octopus were the inspiration for how the letters are kind of chaotically floating around. For the cat's interference with Cloud Castle Lake, I found a pretty direct, great counterpart in this bookplate. So I took the symmetry and the idea of leaving the window open. My shutters are implied. They're on the outside, in case you were wondering. And then this juvenile bookplate, which is, again, I showed it earlier, it's a universal bookplate. This was a reference point for the cat's experience inside Cat and Mouse. It just kind of felt very appropriate to use this design with panels to show quick sequences of cartoon chaos. And then for the journey through Sleep Death's Brother, I was very much drawn to the negative space in this bookplate and the way the light and the shadows were handled. It felt very calming. It felt like a world I really wanted to spend time in, which made it a fun foil for building a scene you'd want to leave. So the title of the project, again, is Catenary Books, and I stole that from my father-in-law. I took it from, I was inspired by one of his artworks. So my father-in-law's name is Mark O'Donnell, and all of his, well, not all, he has more inside, but a lot of his artwork is publicly viewable in an alley in Brewery Town, Philadelphia. It's called Flora Alley. He calls it Flora Alley Gallery, and he uses it as his own outdoor gallery. He's convinced some of his neighbors to let him expand it on their fences and walls as well. And he works primarily with all-weather materials like car paint on aluminum panels, and he seals the surfaces with clear coat so they don't degrade outside, and they're huge as well. Many of his pieces incorporate concepts from physics and calculus. If you can read this title, it says, Princess TP orchestrates the objective reduction of the wave function. That is a classic Mark O'Donnell title. He has another piece that illustrates a woman walking along the catenary, and that's actually a line from that title as well. I just don't happen to have a photo of it right now. So that was the inspiration for the title. A catenary is a natural arc that forms when a line is tethered to two opposing points, like the arc of a telephone wire. So in this project, the catenary becomes a way to describe the connective space in between books, linking them to a larger imagined connection. That's why the first bit of text inside the first flap when you open it leads with the bookshop cat walks along the catenary. So for me, part of the conceit of the project is that once you sign your name and place a bookplate into one of your own books, your personal library becomes an extension of Catenary Books. And Pop, which is what I call my father-in-law, has helpfully given us a visual example of a catenary in this red velvet rope protecting his rooftop jazz club. So my process for this project extended far outside of my normal comfort zone in a great way. I tried a lot of new things, but I started with a very familiar process, which was just kind of loose, chaotic thumbnail sketches in pencil that no one can understand but me. I probably have like 12 pages that all look like this with notes scattered. The process for this project extended far outside of my normal comfort zone by drawing digitally in Photoshop. And that just allows me to move and adjust elements very, very quickly. So I probably went through, 10 to 15 variations for each design. And these are just a few of the sketches for the book plate on the right, just so you can kind of see, different variations that it went through on its way to what it became. And then this one, I think gets in the zone of what you might call control freak. This is when I started, I get the tunnel vision and I start just kind of focusing on moving pixels around and focusing on tiny details that truly no one cares about. Just to make, to make the project take longer, I'm not sure. But these are all later stages of this design. They're very minute. The one on the bottom right, I think, is the final digital sketch. And so you can see the end result was pretty close. I deliberately made these like super tight so that when I hand drew over them, because they're so small, there was really no room for error. So before I went to the next step of tracing those on a light box and hand drawing them, I needed to learn how to silkscreen. So I took 2 workshops at Gutenberg Arts in Gutenberg, New Jersey. And I took Intro to Silkscreen, and I took Painterly Silkscreen, which ended up having nothing to do with my project, but it was so much fun. And so because the book plates are 3.5 by 4.5 inches from edge to edge, and screen printing floods the paper with ink, unlike some other printmaking processes, I found out that I really needed to be judicious with detail. And I also had a lot to learn about paper very quickly. What holds ink well, what buckles, what survives handling, since it will be in use. And also, what won't create a visible dent when pasted into a book. Paper that's flexible enough but strong enough for the process and the usage. So this is a view of my light box from above on my desk. So after I settled on a digital sketch, I printed it out and drew the final scenes on the light box using a conical nib pen dipped in Sumi ink, which is not probably the appropriate ink for that pen. But on the right, if you can see, it's hard to see the depth, but it's kind of shaped like a bullet with a little pointy end. So it has several channels, so a lot of ink can flow down. And the nib is pretty broad also, which helped me keep a broad line and not get too thin for printing. So it helped me work with the constraints of screen printing in mind. You can get infinitely detailed if you're working digitally, and there's just no way to pull yourself out of that vortex. So this ended up being the way. And so then after I was finished, I scanned my ink drawings back into the computer. I definitely did more cleanup in Photoshop and quality control. And then I output the files to the print shop specifications. They sent me back this file to check, which was, it showed all the book plates arranged on a 24 by 14 inch canvas for transparency printing. And then on the right is an image of one of the transparencies that we taped onto the screen. So from there, we went through the full silkscreen process about 6 times, 1 screen per design, over 2 days. It took about 14 hours, and the only reason we got it done that fast is because Russ Spikowski, the managing director of Gutenberg Arts, oversaw the entire process with me. This project would not happen without him. I would be living in New Jersey. I wouldn't have a job. It would still be happening. And so a lot of people, were saying, hey, why don't you just like print them all out on one screen, you know, pull the squeegee once and you're done. You have all 6. So Russ has been teaching me the right way to do things, what he calls the right way, not the fast way, which I'll explain in a second here, actually. So one of the things he taught me, I'm a little impatient sometimes. He taught me to slow down and do things the right way. So in this case, this is an example of it. To pay attention to how each design took the ink slightly differently and adjust the bead of ink at the top and the pressure that you're bearing down on the ink for that. So this print kept sticking to the bottom of the screen, and it's because it was the print that had the most ink. So we used a smaller bead of ink and less pressure, and so I started to understand the nightmare he had saved me from. And so in the end, we formed a kind of assembly line to get it all done. He exposed the screens while I taped up the others. I'm showing off my handiwork, my taping skills on the left. And then I registered them on the vacuum print table with the screen, which in the middle, I think you can see the holes probably, the little holes. It's like the opposite of an air hockey table. There are little suction holes that hold the paper down so it doesn't shift during printing. So because this paper was so thin and delicate, that was really, really helpful. So then Russ pulled the prints and I checked them for consistency, loaded the next sheet, and and let me move forward here. And did I not mention the dog? I'm so sorry I didn't introduce you to Ragnar. This is Ragnar. He's the print shop dog. So keep in mind, I was also doing this with a dog leaning against my leg and taking naps on my foot. So I'm skipping around a little bit. So once the prints were dry, I went home and committed myself to kind of trimming them down, moving on to the enclosures, and then on the right is the first prototype. That helped me a lot. I realized I needed to streamline the tabs so there were less cuts to make, fewer angles, less chance of it ripping. And so once I got going, this is what my studio looked like. Every night I would sweep it out, and by the end of the next day, it just kind of looked like this again. And then these tab slots actually ended up being the trickiest part of the whole project in a way, I think. There's no reason you need to know this, but I think I'm just showing off how hard I worked. I actually ended up using a hollow steel punch that I ordered from a hardware store with a rawhide mallet, which I splurged on specifically because they're quieter than rubber and I didn't want to disturb my neighbors. To make rounded ends, and then I connected them with an X-Acto blade. I think I threw out about 10 finished enclosures because my slots were not the best. I'm not saying they're all the best. There were just worse ones. I also had this custom embossing die made. That's the object on the right. It's the metal plate that fits into an embosser. So that was for the belly band. So I pressed that to produce the embossing on the belly band. And then that simplified version was produced on the custom stamp on the left. So the Catenary Books logo, doubles as the project title and the logo for the bookshop where the cat lives. And then on the left are just some of the little, stamp designs as I went along. I don't know why that took me so long. And then on the bottom is the hand-drawn. It was the same process. I printed out a digital sketch, traced over it by hand, scanned that back in, and sent that to the manufacturer. So, almost every component of this project uses paper from French paper, which is, they make screen printing paper. Who knew? All that time I spent looking for paper. I really wanted the components of this project individually to reflect the same level of care I had given the book plates themselves. So the people at the print shop introduced me to this company, which is a family-run mill that manufactures locally using hydroelectric power. I probably ordered a dozen samples from them before settling on the final paper for each component. I tested ink and paint to see how it sat on the paper, how it handled, whether it buckled, and I even did some marbling experiments on it, which was kind of like a fun side quest of this project. And so I don't know if you could see it in the smaller photos, but on the back and front of the stack of book plates, there's a cut piece of interleaving tissue. So that's archival, unbuffered tissue that's there just to help protect the book plates from the motion inside the enclosure. And then the logo is also stamped using pigment-based waterproof Ranger archival ink. I like art supplies, so it's kind of fun for me to get into the weeds of like, oh no, I have to buy this archival ink for this project, you know. And in addition to the wonderful community I found here at the Grolier Club, this project also introduced me to a community around printmaking. I became a studio member of Gutenberg Arts in order to rent the studio time to complete the project. And this is a shot from their fundraiser, which I attended a few months ago. So I met this, great community that sprung up in this area around the idea of supporting this facility and using the facility. They also run they have a small artist-run press of designed objects and books called Paper Crown. Why can't I say that word? Paper Crown Press. So one of the unexpected results of going through this process and creating this project is that they're now publishing it as an artist portfolio. I think it went up on the website today. And so, I'm somebody who really loves independent publishing, wants to support independent publishing. So I'm excited to work with them on it and, do it in a way that'll also, help support and sustain them. And so that's pretty much it. Like, I'm really excited to see what happens with the book plates once they leave my little room. The idea behind the project is that they really become activated through use. I did sign the backs, but people shouldn't let that deter them from putting some paste on there and slapping it into a book. So again, like when someone writes their name on one of these and places it in their own book, their collection becomes tethered to Catenary Books. And so it might open some new doors. Maybe the cat will go somewhere in your collection along the Catenary. I won't be there to witness it. If you want to make your own book plate about that part of the journey, please email it to me. I would love to see other people documenting the cat's journey in their own way. And that's it. So I just want to thank everyone again at the Grolier Club, all the wonderful people I met during the fellowship. Also, Frank Wu, the president of Queens College, is also a member and first actually introduced me to the Grolier Club. So I want to thank him as well. And just, thank you everyone for having me today. I brought some physical examples of the project. So I laid a couple out on the display table up front for afterward, just if anyone wants to take a closer look at the physical results. Yeah.
I should say we've got a microphone in the back if anybody would like to ask questions. Oh, Scott over there. You're actually answering them. Sorry.
Hello.
Hi, Scott.
I'm Scott. I work in the Grolier Club Library, so it's really wonderful to see how this project turned out. I just wanted to know if you have already pasted copies in your own books.
I have not. I am also being precious about them, but hopefully I'll get over it.
if I missed this, but how did you settle on silk screening as your medium?
I actually kind of polled my printmaking friends. I don't have experience with printmaking. I was told lithography is hard. I was warned about it from several people. Yeah, but I think I just honestly ended up at like a dinner at someone's apartment with some screen printers, and they advocated for screen printing. Suspicious looking back on it, but it turned out well.
Hi, what was the 7th book that you picked and were planning on and then changed your mind about?
Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin.
Do you think you might keep working with silk screening?
I do. I really, really enjoyed it, to be honest. Yeah, I like it a lot. The last part where you're actually doing the printing, the setup is insane. It's so long. I think I enjoy that you can do some painterly things with it. I liked playing around with the different inks. I think I like the freedom and flexibility of it a lot. I don't know. I think it just works for my brain.
Does the cat have a name?
The cat is unnamed.
Hello. Hi. So from what you know about like screen printing and like all of this like printmaking techniques, how do you think it will like change the way you work in digital illustration?
That's a really good question. Well, for one thing, I think it's going to be in the back of my mind that these could become screen prints if I play my cards right. You do get a little weary of the way you've been working, and it's so exciting to have something tangible, and handcrafted. And I do think in the future I'll be thinking about creating things that could be printed in that way, even if the concept of the project doesn't require them to be. I think I'd like to give myself the option.
Hearing you speak about the range of book plates you got to examine from heraldic to juvenile, could you speak about your process of the final 6 that you drew direct inspiration from? Were you already thinking about them as a kind of collection, or were they these individual lightning strikes of inspiration?
Were my book plates always a collection? Oh, that's funny. No, I never saw the book plates I was using as design inspiration as a collection, interestingly. What I basically did was, I felt like I looked at thousands of book plates, and my enthusiasm did not waver. So I was taking so many photos. I had so many folders of photos, and then I would just narrow them down from like 1,000 photos to 600. And I would pull inspiration and put them in different folders with different names. And I just narrowed them down to 25 and then to 8. I had a couple of inspirations for a couple of the book plates and had to decide. But it was really all about whether I could see the scene working with those forms, and if it kind of sparked an idea when I looked at the book plate of how I could design the scene around those elements and what it could bring to the scene. That excited me. And I also just wanted to use designs that had very different elements from each other as inspiration. I was kind of careful not to choose book plate designs for inspiration that felt too similar.
I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions.
I was just curious if non-linear narratives are a theme that you're interested in continuing to work with in future projects.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm really excited by the idea of interruption in narrative and provoking more and more frustration from the reader or the viewer as a way to interact with people. So I think, I think provocative nonlinear narrative is in my future.
Has that outdoor jazz club at your father-in-law's place ever been functional?
He does go up on the ladder sometimes, but I don't know if I don't think that gumball machine is active, but I wouldn't be surprised if he hangs out up there, sure.
I think that's kind of a delightful note to end on. So I'd love for you guys to join me in thanking Kristy for a really, really special program. Thank you.